K-219, the doomsday submarine that almost ended the world. October 3, 1986. The Atlantic Ocean, 680 miles northeast of Bermuda. On board, a Soviet nuclear ballistic missile submarine, K-219. What happened next would become one of the most terrifying underwater disasters of the Cold War, and one of the most tightly guarded secrets of the Soviet Navy. At first glance, K-219's patrol was routine, one of many deterrence missions conducted by the Soviet Navy to maintain strategic balance with the United States. K-219 was a Project 667A Yankee I-class submarine, heavily armed with 16 R-27U ballistic missiles, each carrying a nuclear warhead with a yield of over 1 megaton. But there was a problem. The vessel was outdated. Built in 1971, K-219 had already suffered repeated technical issues, and her missile tubes had a history of seal failures, allowing seawater to leak in. Earlier in the decade, a nearly identical incident had occurred aboard another Yankee-class submarine, killing crew members and nearly triggering a nuclear disaster. The Soviet Navy had patched the design flaws, but only cosmetically. On the morning of October 3rd, a muffled explosion shook the sub. A missile silo, tube number 6, had ruptured. Seawater had reached the launch compartment and mixed with leftover fuel and oxidizer, producing a corrosive cloud of nitric acid and nitrogen tetroxide. The volatile mix triggered a fire. The compartment quickly filled with toxic gas. 2 sailors were killed instantly. Flames threatened to reach the warhead inside the tube. If it detonated, it wouldn't just destroy the submarine, it could ignite a nuclear fireball in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The captain, Igor Britanov, immediately surfaced the submarine and ordered emergency procedures. He knew this wasn't just a mechanical failure, this was a potential Armageddon scenario. The reactor had to be shut down before the fire spread. But automatic shutdown failed. The only option left was manual insertion of the control rods into the reactor. That's when 20-year-old seaman Sergei Perminin stepped forward. Wearing only basic protective gear, Sergei entered the reactor chamber, which was now filled with unbearable heat, steam, and radiation. He managed to insert the control rods, shutting down the reactor and preventing a potential nuclear explosion. But as he tried to exit the hatch, it had warped from the heat. He was trapped inside. Sergei Perminin died of heat and radiation exposure. He was posthumously honored as a hero, though his name remained unknown in the West for years. With the reactor shut down, the crew's attention turned to saving the ship. But the damage was already done. Missile Compartment 6 continued to leak. Toxic fumes spread through the submarine. Britanov ordered his men topside, onto the deck, awaiting rescue from Soviet vessels. Meanwhile, American satellites had already picked up the disturbance. U.S. Navy forces, including the submarine USS Augusta, were monitoring the situation closely. Here's where the mystery deepens. Some Soviet accounts, including reports from surviving officers, claim that USS Augusta had been shadowing K-219 for days. According to these accounts, the American submarine may have collided with K-219 during a close pass, triggering the rupture in Missile Tube 6. The U.S. government has always denied this, insisting that Augusta was not involved in any collision. But satellite data from both sides remains classified. To this day, we don't know the full truth. Another theory suggests something even darker, that the K-219 was under political pressure to remain on station longer than was safe. The Soviet Navy needed to maintain a presence in the Atlantic, just 5,000 kilometers from the U.S. East Coast. The boat's deteriorating condition was overlooked in favor of strategic objectives. In other words, the crew was sacrificed for the sake of appearances in a geopolitical chess game. According to former Soviet officers, Captain Britanov requested an immediate return to base following earlier technical issues on the patrol, but his superiors denied the request. After the accident, he disobeyed orders by surfacing and evacuating the crew without authorization. For that, he was relieved of command, arrested upon return, and later charged with negligence and treason, though the charges were dropped after the fall of the Soviet Union. Britnov has since spoken publicly, describing the chaos and fear aboard K-219. He insists that he saved his crew and possibly millions of lives by making decisions the Soviet command refused to make. The submarine drifted for 3 days. Soviet freighters arrived to assist, and most of the crew was evacuated. But on October 6th, K-219 finally sank beneath the waves, disappearing into the abyss 18,000 feet down. She took with her 4 sailors, several nuclear warheads, and a reactor core. To this day, the wreck lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, still armed. The warheads, while not armed to detonate, pose a long-term environmental and radiological threat, but recovery has never been attempted. The depth is too great, the risks too high. And what if the worst had happened? What if the fire had triggered a warhead explosion? What if the reactor had melted down at sea? What if American or Soviet command had misinterpreted the incident as an act of war? We now know how close the Cold War came to disaster, not just in nuclear missile silos, but in the cold, dark silence of the ocean. In the 1980s alone, there were at least 5 serious nuclear submarine incidents involving the USSR, each with the potential to escalate. The ocean floor is now dotted with sunken reactors and radioactive material from both sides of the Iron Curtain. Why does this story matter? Because K-219 wasn't just a submarine. It was a floating symbol of Cold War insanity, a relic of flawed engineering, military secrecy, and human sacrifice. Because one young man gave his life to prevent a nuclear disaster, and his story is still not widely known. Because for every headline we remember from that era, there are 100 silent tragedies we don't. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, the hull of K-219 lies silently in the dark. A rusting tomb. And a warning. A reminder of just how close the world came to the brink. Not through missiles launched, but through accidents, miscalculations, and silence. Please don't forget to subscribe or write a comment and put a bell so as not to miss new videos. Thanks for watching.